think I've got it figured out. Yeah. So we're rolling. So I'll give you the count. How about like this? 3, 2, 1, and then you can
Sure.
just go. So, all right.
Hi, everybody. This is John Spangler. I've gotten to meet and know quite a few of you, but some of you don't know me. But I shared a few things at the men's breakfast Saturday morning a while back, and Pastor Sean asked me to maybe share some of that with you today, too. And the reason why is a verse that he's been particularly interested in and exploring is Romans 8:28. And that has become kind of like the motto verse of my life. You see, I'm a Hoosier by birth. That means I was born in Indiana. It's a good state to be from. And for whatever reason, God put me into a family of alcoholics. Both my parents were career alcoholics, and uncles, grandparents, aunts, all over the place. Many of them were severely addicted to alcohol. And the behaviors that come from that can be pretty rough to grow up with. There's a lot of insanity. I call it chemical insanity in my family. So, for example, with my father, there were times, he's a great guy when he's sober, but I went through a lot of beatings, terrible circumstances of rage, some perhaps you might call neglect. I mean, even in kindergarten, I had to get myself up out of bed, make my own breakfast, pick out my own clothes, which didn't always work out too well, and get outside and wait to get picked up to go to kindergarten. I remember that many times because my mother was always too sick, if you know what I mean. She was never in a condition to help. And so I kind of grew up with all that nonsense, and I have some terrible memories of that. My father's rage and violence was horrible. I was thrown downstairs. I was beaten with belts repeatedly. One time my father got so much enraged, he dragged me into my bedroom and grabbed me by the throat, and I thought I was going to die. He was choking me. My mom came in with a frying pan and screaming at him, and I don't know, kind of came to his senses anyway, backed off. But that's the kind of stuff I was growing up with as a kid. And you know, if there was one thing I swore when I was then, I was not going to be a drunk like my dad. You know, I was not going to be like that. You know, but because of those kind of experiences, it sets up insecurities and kind of twists your personality and stuff. So that by the time I was in high school, guess what I was doing? I was getting drunk just like everybody else. Okay, and it was pretty bad. I left my family while I was still in high school, 17 years old. They moved up north, and I said goodbye. I want nothing to do with you anymore. In fact, it was 5 solid years before I ever even saw or had a word with my father after that. And a couple more years before we really kind of got back together. God kind of laid that on my heart. But in the course of those years, I'm lucky I even lived. Actually graduated from high school in spite of all that. And headed off to university, where I was trying to find answers to my questions. Why are we here? What's going on? What's this all about? And I still had all that bitterness and anger inside of me to start with. I mean, I used to dream night after night, different ways I'd murder my father. I could kill that man, this kind of stuff. And it was just a real dark time in my life. And anyway, but then things started changing after my first year at college. Because just prior to that, becoming exactly what I swore I wouldn't be, doing exactly what I said I'd never do, you start developing a lot of what they call self-hate. And I really disappointed myself. I violated my own morals, if you will, and all that sort of thing, and moved pretty deeply into a spiritual crisis. So much so that I became self-destructive, and primarily not because only that I was what I didn't want to be, swore I wouldn't be, but I was without hope. I tried changing, tried to behave myself, and failed miserably, okay? And so I've got an interesting scar that runs down my arm, starting up here. That was my first lame attempt. And yeah, you probably can't see it from there, but that's okay. It's pretty prominent. That's not exactly a good way to try to kill yourself, by the way. You just bleed out and then it stops bleeding and you're done, okay? But much more seriously, and this is my ties to California again, took off on a trip out here, wound up in Yosemite National Park, and twice I was ready to step off of a cliff to at least a couple hundred feet down to solid rock. And to be perfectly honest with you, looking back on it now, I think those were interventions by God, okay? And I'm not going to go into all the detail why that is, but needless to say, didn't do it, okay? Didn't get the job done. And I really shouldn't be alive now, but here we are. And after that experience, went back to the university, started really trying to find answers. I read all kinds of stuff. I took philosophy course. I read Khalil Gibran and Nietzsche, and I was reading the Vedas of Hinduism, and I was studying some of the teachings of Zen, and just a lot of stuff. Last thing on the list, of course, was the Bible, because I'd bumped into that before. I think as probably a teenager, I tried to read it once, and couldn't make sense out of it. And believe me, during high school, you couldn't pay me to go to any church. But I said this to God: if you're out there, God, I'm not going to fake it. I'm not going to act any different on the outside than I am on the inside. So if something's got to happen, you got to change me inside out. I'm not going to go through the motions. And I think that depth of honesty is what God was waiting for. And things started to turn around from there. I met the most wonderful woman in the world, who eventually became my wife, Linda. And she was a tremendously powerful influence on my life. And I really wasn't good for her in the beginning. She had every reason in the world to just walk away from me, and she should have. I was precisely the kind of guy that her folks told her to stay away from, okay? But she says, oh, I was so stupid. No, I like to believe that God had a hand in that too. But slowly but surely, I started a new life, and come to discover a personal relationship with Christ, not just religion, not just symbols and rituals and affiliations, but to really know the Lord and really seek after Him. And slowly start to discern something of what He wanted me to do with my life, what He wanted me to be, and how to listen for His voice, either through His book, but also in the circumstances of my life. And Romans 8:28 was one that really shook my world, because when I understood that God had literally, before He created the universe, before He made the first subatomic particle, before He started the first vector of energy, He planned it all out, and He knew where He needed me to be. And so He put me into my family, into this time of the history of the world, into this country, knowing full well some of the things I'd go through and some of the bad choices I'd make and the bad things I'd experience, so that eventually He'd get me to where I needed to be. And I have to be honest with you, I've used the negative experiences of my life 100 times more in counseling others, encouraging other people, in understanding them and giving them, the courage to keep going, than I ever did with all the positive things I've gone through. And God has given me a fabulous life. I've been around the world several times. I've done mission work in India and Thailand. I've been a professor and taught everything from astronomy and astrophysics to biblical courses and theology to Greco-Roman culture. I've just had an amazing, wonderful life. I've got a family of great kids who are, most of which are in Christian ministry to this day. And I look back and I say, yes, God has been faithful. That He worked all those negative things as well as the good, the bad, and the ugly, ultimately for good. And that's only because He is good and loving. And my feeble attempts to love Him back and try to seek after His will, He took what I gave Him, and what was really of me He forgave, and has given me new life, a new direction, and I couldn't be happier. I've had an awesome life. And I want to encourage those of you who are here today that you can trust Him. That it may not be specifically for your best good, but for the good, as He knows and understands it more than we ever possibly could. All things work together for good to those who love God and are willing to be called according to His purposes. And I want to share that with you today. God bless you all. Thanks.